On May 25th, George Floyd was murdered in public by the Minneapolis Police Department, something that we all saw within a few days on video. And it profoundly affected not just myself, but this entire country. And as I began to reflect on it as a poet and an activist, I began to write. Poems didn't come every day, but every few days as I thought about it, as I thought about myself as a white person within this whole system of white privilege, it began to shape what I was writing. And slowly, George Floyd became a presence in the poems that I wrote. Not every poem that I wrote, but every few days, at least every week, another poem would seem to rise in a way where I felt that I could take whatever craft I had, whatever examination I had of my own life, and I could merely step aside and the poem would fall onto the page. And that's what I tried to do. So I'm going to be reading about 19 poems for George Floyd and about the landscape around him that we all now inhabit. And then about 4 more poems after that. So I want to start with the poem that I wrote 2 days after George Floyd was murdered. This is called Speaking in Tongues. The word that means breath also means falling without pity, and is the same word that means the lack of even a sheltering space on the sidewalk, of a plea to the one holding you down in the impossible quiet of unexpectedly not breathing. And that is the only word that mimics the sound of the oars of a rowboat pulling away from the shore of a country that has killed people that you loved. And that word, in some places, also means imprisonment or beatings, maybe death, depending on the stress put on the last syllable of one's unsaid confession, which is filled with words that mean lying, or enemy of the state, or when linked to the internal borders of racism, or when coupled with the words for corruption, means that the front door was on fire even before you got there. This is called Simply Breathing for George Floyd. They told him to stop living in his skin. They told him that his wings would never grow back. But every time they threw him to the ground, every time they crushed his breath, he rose up again in spirit and memory. He rose up still another of the sea of flags that cover this country like a shroud from coast to coast. I began to think about the situations where the police around this country have essentially murdered Black Americans, and how at that moment they become the judge and the jury and the executioner. And that prompted me to write this poem, which is called A Summary of guidelines for extrajudicial police street sentencing of African Americans for George Floyd. The sentence for running through a landscape of inequality is death. The sentence for aggressively not having money in public is death. The sentence for selling individual cigarettes and otherwise annoying the order of Western civilization is death. The sentence for carrying a sign asking for justice and equal representation is death. The sentence for marching, demanding human rights is death. The sentence for being seen in public expressing personal outrage is death. The sentence for running away from death is death. The sentence for observing that we are living in a counterfeit $20 country is death. The sentence for watching all of this take place every day for 400 years in an endless, almost airless silence is who the rest of us have become. Oh. This is called How Do We Loosen This Violent Sadness That Holds to Us? It might be midnight when you pull over to the shoulder of the road to weep. Blinkers on, you can't loosen your grip on the wheel. You want to breathe one long breath for George Floyd and Eric Garner, but can't. You want to find a road through these unforgiving mountains, but can't. On the radio is someone else whose name you don't yet know, but can see on the ground somewhere in the past or future. You want to drive past this always present emptiness, but can't. You used to sit on the bench next to the maple trees' green leaves, but those leaves long ago turned blood red. You used to find your way home, thinking it was easy. It seems impossible now. This is called On Any Given Day for George Floyd. What did you hear as everything started to fall away? Maybe your mother singing in the kitchen, and that is why you called to her. wanting her to know that you couldn't take a full breath with this country pressing down on your neck, and that you wanted her to come into the street to pull them off of you, saying, enough of that, enough of that. Go home to your mothers. And maybe if the police had called to their own mothers from behind that squad car, maybe if they had pleaded that they needed just another 8 minutes and 46 seconds to finish pushing your color into the pavement, as they had with so many others, maybe then their mothers would have come quickly across the street and knelt beside them and said that the color of anyone's skin is only the shoreline of their body, not the ocean of what they think and live on any given day. And maybe before they could kill you, their mothers would have stopped them, saying that they had already shamed them enough with this brutality. And maybe their mothers would have pulled them off of you, saying, who taught you to act this way? Why are you comfortable doing this? This is called In the Absence of Reason for George Floyd. I have no answer to give the cold wind that cuts across your body, except to fill each empty word that darkens this shared sky with small poems that might turn the day around, at least enough to protect you from your own country. This is called Along the White Road to Here. I want to take one step back and then another over lifetimes until I arrive at the first moment that someone with the color of my white skin created the racism and cruelty that was useful to them and this country from that day to this day. I want to step back to that first moment and encounter that white snake of skin that matches my own whiteness and grind it into dust forever. This is called In George Floyd's Burial Shroud. He rose from his street grave as a prophet. His last words became our first words. I can't breathe. And the feeling is one of terror and suffocation, followed by a rage filled with history. We have raised his burial shroud above our individual lives like a flag, and each day we march under it towards this country and ourselves. It's called Uncharted Waters. This is a poem written on the pieces of a few days typed in the white margins that enclose my life. Each grieving part of every hour has come now to observe us without pity. I hunger for a justice that will include myself in any and all verdicts of guilty. Although these poems focus on George Floyd, we all know that so many other lives have been taken. In the not just distant past, and all those thousands upon thousands of lives that were taken. But names that we remember now, like Michael Brown, or Rayshard Brooks, Ahmaud Arbery, Eric Gardner, Oscar Grant, Breonna Taylor, Freddie Gray, Trayvon Martin, and Tamir Rice. I think they're all present in these poems. It's George Floyd and the way he died that has so moved this country, and I think makes it both accessible and imperative that we all say Black Lives Matter. It's called Stopping Here. I want to wipe away the white chalk that has outlined my body for so long. I want to turn off this dangerous noise still living under my skin. These days, the water in every glass wants to drown me unless I drink it down. I cannot escape myself. My tongue wants to keep lying to me until I shut my mouth and listen to where these days have brought me. There is no place left on any sidewalk for me to hide. No place left for me to not see your life ending under the white knee of my accepted justice. I want to stop everything here, right now, in the anguish of truth. This is called The Full Length of These Days. A small bird flies down from a rooftop in heaven to simply watch us in silence. There is no limit to what we will do to avoid his eye. The police have rubbed their guns smooth with the history of our fear. How do we sink the empty slave ships still drifting nearby on this white sea of hate? None of these poems that I'm reading tonight, none of the poems that I write are destinations. They're part of a journey, really, that I think everyone in this country is on or should be on. So I'm only showing really the pathway that I am on, and I hope there is space there for you as well. This is called Another Floor. People have been brutalized under the tent of my white skin for centuries. This is a continuing narrative that starts on the floor of a street without any air, on, off, to the side of the slippery concrete of a blood-lined sidewalk. My words don't want the silence of the page anymore. They want to do the hard work of these waking days, right here, right now, until they change me and this narrative in a lasting way. This is called If We Fail to Change, Nothing Will Change, for George Floyd. They already had some white handcuffs on your black life before they put you face down in the standing racist water. And didn't we all see how much stillness there was in your violent death? And didn't they think that no one could hear your life ending with a blue forest of bodies falling on you? And didn't they think that no white person would ever confess to being there for any part of the 400 years and 8 minutes and 46 seconds that this continuously took place? And when the white policeman with his knee on your neck looked at the 17-year-old young woman filming him and didn't stop pressing down, wasn't he showing her and us that nothing would change? Nothing would change. Nothing would ever change. And that tomorrow would simply be the next day. And this is where we are now. And wasn't he wrong? So profoundly wrong. This is called allowing for mistakes. We need a new prayer, a plain spoken prayer without adornments, one that isn't so selfish that it forsakes us on its way to God. We need a prayer that protects no one from the hard truth, a prayer that has room for all the names of those who will die today, taken from their loved ones, taken by hatred or alone in the ICU. We need a plain spoken prayer that might stop the murders of those only trying to live. We need a new prayer that can be called out in the parking lot, behind the market, or whispered on the sidewalk into loneliness. A prayer without money or power attached to it. We need a new prayer, so plain spoken of what and of who we have become that it wakes up heaven. This is called shadow policing. Your hands will be covered with a text written from hundreds of years of blood. Your dark uniform will be a lowering sky that can be brought down hard to the sidewalk without remorse. There will be days that your gun will almost point itself at anyone with black skin who you sense may make the day unsteady in your white imagination. After you are comfortable with seeing people of color as waiting enemies, every violent, fatal encounter that you begin or end will be practice for the next one. This is called coming back for your coat. What makes us stop breathing? What decision does the heart make without our consent? What is any bullet looking for as it opens the body? Someone is lifting a child into the air at the exact moment that someone else is being beaten to the ground. We are trying to judge how far ahead the darkness turns into light. An entire life may collapse into a few seconds of violence, the day easily shifting into shadow. The imbalance of words and thought can become a poem. I recall each morning the name of this country and look for it. But I no longer know where it is. This is called Unwritten for George Floyd. We sleep under our own nightmare sky, our hearts beating like the wings of a small trapped bird. Before waking, before our first confessed thought, we try again to fly away. This is called On Maintaining a Disruptive Memory. Take 2 long breaths and keep one for yourself. Take 2 long breaths and hold the other for the rest of your life for George Floyd. So this poem is the last in this series, written just a few days ago. It's called A Poet on the Coast. Neither of my hands has ever known what the other is thinking. My right hand knows I am lost in an ashen forest after the death of my country. My left hand knows that I am still trying to translate the violent murder of George Floyd into understandable words. There has always been a rooted world under the white concrete of my skin. And it is there that I pray and swear in equal amounts as I try to bring my 2 hands together on the page. These last few poems are for particular people and moments. The first one for the letterpress printer, artist, and activist Felicia Rice, who put these poems for George Floyd up on her webpage, for which I thank her forever. And she has continued to add ones that are appropriate to that page. Felicia lost her home and her press shop, which was under the house, in the Santa Cruz Mountain fire just a few weeks ago. But Felicia is coming back. She is simply too stubborn to give up. And this is a poem I wrote for her. It's called Moving Parts. Her press is called Moving Parts Press. Moving Parts for Felicia Rice. The clouding sun burns at your lucid memory. There is nothing on the radio but fire. Nothing in the trees but fire. To set the first poem outside of yourself, you will need lead type cooled into a single letter, followed by another and another, and a storm-tossed ocean nearby to steady you. Your hands, day by day, working a text from a nebula of ash. We are fast approaching the 1-year anniversary of the start of the revolution for freedom, justice, equality, and an end to corruption and foreign influence in Iraq. More than 700 unarmed demonstrators were killed by government-sanctioned security forces and militias, and more than 12,000 Iraqis were wounded during demonstrations. There have been continuing killings, arrests, tortures, and beatings of activists. But this revolution, despite these horrific losses, has not disappeared, and the Iraqi people continue to raise their collective voice to demand justice and peace. There will be marches and demonstrations during the first week of October throughout Iraq. Our project, Al-Mutanabi Street Starts Here, continues to stand with the Iraqi people in their struggle for a more just society. And I want to read 2 poems from a series of poems that I wrote while this revolution was going on in Iraq last year. They're all called Letter to Iraq and have the date when I wrote them. Letter to Iraq, November 13th, 2019. How much of your sky is left to pull down? How much light does each falling body take with it as it hits the ground? You fold your reading glasses and put them in your pocket. You cover your nose and mouth with a handkerchief and walk out into the street. Someone recognizes you from the university and waves. She loves, believes in poetry as much as you do. And together you walk towards where there is the most noise and smoke. For it is there that liberty is being born, and you both want to see it. No matter what happens, you both want to be part of that brutal, miraculous joy at its birth. This is called Letter to Iraq, December 12th, 2019. When you opened the book of liberty, the snow-white pages were bleeding. When you read aloud the first few words of equality, someone was shot and died in your arms. A thick black smoke is rising from every blood-soaked document of repression. And if anyone is still asleep, if anyone still has a doubt, wake them up now. This last poem is for Eric and Burden Beckett, which is such an incredible home for both jazz and poetry, has been, is, and will be going into the future. Eric has done just an amazing service to this community and this city by the events that he hosts here at Bird and Beckett. And I can say proudly that he's supported our project, Alma Tanabe Street Starts Here, from its very beginning. So this is a poem for Charlie Parker and for Eric and for Bird and Beckett. It's called Words Slide Away for Charlie Parker. It's impossible to catch up with every run of your notes, but you did, and ran them back again in another direction. Even now, we keep trying to confess your name, even as each black body keeps falling away. You could live, but not sleep within our white nightmares that ran the length of your life. You kept crossing and recrossing against every red light that this country put up to slow you down. You should know that your horn still starts cars braking, buses pulling over, shouts and cries from corner sinners and drifting healers. These days, I think of you because, as in your music, nothing is at rest anymore. Thank you.